A big new project launched on Chia yesterday. Finally out of stealth. I can't wait to finally start talking about this. So it's NotBot, digital identity verifiable credentials. The way that I had originally conceived of this project and the tagline that I had for it is it's like TSA precheck for the entire internet. I think Ken is still experimenting with some ways to help people understand what it is, but to me that really resonated. I'm had TSA pre-check for a while. It feels like a fast track to being at the airport. You can just immediately walk through without a lot of extra doing stuff because the airport trusts you. And to me, really, NotBot is about trust. It's how we establish a trust mechanism for the entire internet. There have been things that have changed pretty recently where websites are fundamentally saying they don't trust you and they want you to prove that you are who you say you are. YouTube notably has done this with an age verification. So this is like the first way to think about NotBot, and what this technology does is it allows you to say something that another person can trust. So you can say something that YouTube can trust. You can also say something that another person on the internet using some kind of a peer-to-peer interaction can trust. So if you've ever had an interaction where somebody DM'd you and you're not sure it's maybe you're not sure that the person on the other side is being genuine. They could be lying about who they are, or it could be a bot that's trying to trick you. This is a way for you to immediately fire back and say, I'm willing to have an interaction with you if you can prove to me that you are who you say you are. So show me that your first name is really Lucas, that you really live in Colorado, and that you have an assertion of an age range that I can believe. If you say you're Gen X, then show me your age range that shows you're Gen X. Or if you're attesting to be a millennial, then show me your age range demonstrates that you're a millennial. That's it in a nutshell of what you can do with this technology. It goes way further than that, but I think that that's a good place to start understanding it.
I like the metaphor of TSA pre-check, but this is such a fundamental change when it comes to our experience on the internet. Um, TSA checkpoint only scratches the surface, but when you told me that there was a product being built on Chia that was going to allow for people to custody their identities and to assert the pieces of their identity rather than, flashing everything at once like we currently do with our driver's license or our passport or whatever it may be, our KYC verification for so many websites. And we send all of that information into the hands of someone else. And even when they only need to know our age or that we're actually a person, they're collecting all of that data. To me, this is the basis for a great shift in how the internet can operate. But before before you humor my my philosophical ditherings about the implications of what this could be, tell me a little bit about the technology behind NotBot.
We can get there in a second. I think one of the most important things to understand about this tech is not necessarily how it works under the hood, but the mechanics of what data is flowing around where and how that fundamentally works. Because I think that that's a critical part of this. Because when you hear Ken talk about NotBot, one of the things that he mentions is that this is a privacy protecting mechanism. And so the way you onboard into this, and I'll just throw this demo as I talk about it because you can see it in action. I think some of the screens have changed since, so if you have a slightly different experience than what you see here, it's fundamentally not that different. You scan your passport, and what is happening is it's extracting the data off the passport. And the reason passport is an interesting way to onboard into NotBot is you need some sort of identity proof. Now, that identity proof could be something like when you go to TSA PreCheck, they make you come in, present a whole bunch of data, fingerprint you, and they do a verification, background check, whatever. Once you do that, then you have TSA PreCheck and you can do something. You can go into the airport with minimal interference. It's somewhat similar here. A passport presumes that you've done a whole bunch of identity checks. The government made you present all kinds of verifications, your birth certificate and what have you. And then once they actually issue that credential, they give you all of that data back, and it's signed and encoded in the passport. It's encoded in a chip called an NFC. So your phone can read that data. And since that data is all signed, it's trusted. So you extract the data, you do this sort of privacy protecting dance with Julia and the entity that will ultimately hold the data. But that data fundamentally does not flow into a place where it can track you. You can reveal whatever you want. You're holding on to the data. You're in control of it. That's the key of how this thing works is you're collecting the data off the passport. You're giving it to a custodian in a very particular type of privacy protecting dance, which forges you an identity. That identity then does not have to reveal everything that was collected. It can selectively reveal whatever it wants through the creation of these NotBots. So a NotBot proves that you're a human because humans get issued passports. So it's something you have that proves you're a human. You could do a different type of humanness check. You could imagine something like World ID, where Sam Altman sticks that orb thing in front of your face. And from that, they could prove, well, the only way that you could pass this orb check would be to actually be a human. Well, a passport is a stand-in for some in-person verification, and it'll work for a time. It may be that in some time in the future, this path of onboarding might be sufficiently compromised. But at this point, it's probably good enough for most people who would want to accept a NotBot would be to say, if you have signed data that's issued by a government, then we can presume that you're a person. And then once that personhood thing is created, you can now walk around the internet demonstrating that you're a person. So the tech that really underpins a lot of this is that it's building on top of an identity verification that can be trusted because the government did the hard work and then signed all the data. That signed data can be extracted and checked by somebody else, and you can use that to forge a durable identity that can protect your privacy across the internet.
Okay, so the government does the hard work for collecting the data, but NotBot is giving each person custody of their data, and I know it's somewhat complex, but give me a peek at least underneath the hood, because I know
like of how the data works or how the identity itself works.
well, maybe both, but starting with how the data works.
So you rip the data off of the passport, and then you do this dance, which is called multi-party compute. And Ken does a way better job describing what that multi-party compute is, or maybe we can get some technical people on here to talk us through this stuff because it's pretty intimate and detailed and resolves to a bunch of cryptographic stuff. He had partnered with a company called Galois that helped him develop this, and so it's some real low level stuff. It's akin to a zero knowledge proof, but it's different from that. It's faster than that, and there are other benefits that I can't articulate particularly well. But anyway, so the data comes off the passport, and you do this multi-party compute secure cryptography dance with the entities that are involved. So Julia is an issuer. So it is the one that is actually going to create these credentials. You could imagine other issuers. So it could be an employer, it could be your school, it could be anybody who might want to say something about this identity, right? The identity itself is rooted in the passport and it's issued by Julia. Now, in the long term, there may be other identity issuers, but right now, Julia is the first. So then building on top of that identity, let's say you went to the University of North Carolina, something like that. If you could match the identity to what the University of North Carolina knows about that person, then they would be able to say, oh yeah, that person got a degree. So you could get other credentials. The credentials that you get off of your passport have to do with the data that actually exists on the passport. So it's your name, it's your nationality for the purpose of what passport you've been issued. It's the gender that is indicated on your passport. It's your birth date that's on the passport. And your birth date allows you to do something interesting, which is to create a privacy protecting age range. So you can make statements about yourself. I'm over 18. I'm under 16. I am at the age range of 10 to 20. You can make all these types of assertions, and it's rooted in having that birth date piece. So the data that comes off of the phone gets moved around in a very particular way, in a secure way, and ultimately resides with a custodian. And the reason for having a custodian here is at some point, and to comply with certain types of laws, there has to be a mechanism whereby an identity like this could be revealed. Like, it's privacy protecting. That doesn't mean that it's anonymous. It means that you can control what you're revealing, and the amount that you reveal can be as little as you want. But if you go commit crimes with the identity, or if you do things with the identity that you might get in trouble for, then there may be law enforcement or other types of jurisdictions that would want to jump in here and find out who that is. And there is a mechanism for revealing that. That's part of the whole privacy policy that exists within inside of NotBot. So ultimately, the data does exist somewhere, but it was given to you by a government to begin with. It's not like this is some anonymous identity that's been forged for you. It is you. So if you do something with this identity, it's private until you start committing crimes or whatever, and then law enforcement wants to get involved. So if you're acting in good faith and you're not doing things that are unreasonable, I'm pretty sure you're going to be okay with using it. But that is like part of how the whole system works, is the identity data is residing with a custodian.
And does the data not reside in your phone also, or are those just the keys to access that data that is then stored with a custodian?
So the data is extracted from the passport and it's stored locally. It has to be that way, because what you get from Julia is you get a bunch of hashes. So you have to be able to match the data up and say, well, I've been issued this credential. I don't really know how to look at it. It looks somewhat opaque. So there's this process of, I take all the data that I got off of the passport and I have to match it up with what Julia tells me, because Julia doesn't have the data. It doesn't know what it's issuing. It's issuing stuff through this multi-party compute between the custodian and it as the issuer. So when NotBot and Julia say they don't have your data, they really don't. Well, imagine how that would actually work. How can you get a verifiable credential from an issuer when the issuer never saw the data, does not fundamentally have it? It's kind of a tricky thing. But the way it ends up working is you, as the end user, end up matching the data up from what you extracted. So when you think about it, you're extracting the data because you have it in your hand. You have the passport. And so it saves it all to the phone. And then when you get the digital identity and the verifiable credentials from Julia, then you start matching that data up. Now you can use it to say things about yourself.
I see. So the data is stored on your phone. Part of it, part of the Julia acts maybe like a window, but you have this great puzzle, this multi-party compute, and it must all come together to reveal the pieces of your identity when you choose to do so.
Yeah, but you, as the end user, are the one who's revealing the information. So you're making attestations about what you're saying. The thing that is recorded fundamentally into the blockchain is hashes. If you've been a longtime listener of the show, you've heard us talking about how blockchains can be used to store hashes, that they can be used to store data and to root trust. This is the thing that's been on my mind ever since I started working on NotBot. Is this is the thing that blockchains can do really well, and it's the thing you fundamentally need when you want to establish a decentralized trust mechanism. You need a place to be able to put something which ultimately looks like a hash of some data that is immutable, that can't be changed later. And in the world of Chia, what you need is a singleton. So everything that's been done with respect to Tibet swap or the NFTs that have been created using the NFT1 standard, all of them use a piece of technology called a singleton. And that singleton is a coin which has a lineage and it can spend over time, and it has some sameness as other aspects of the coin change over time. So it has a oneness. That oneness is knowable inside the blockchain, and it's resolvable so you can find it. So that's the key here of what it is being created for NotBot under the hood. It creates a singleton on the Chia blockchain, and then that singleton has the ability to have lineages and things that can be checked, and that's all the Chialisp that underpins the whole thing. So if you look at why did NotBot need to launch on Chia, it's a couple reasons. BLS signatures are a really important part of how the underlying tech works, coupled with the sophistication of Chialisp on a coinset model. Those three things coming together enables a self-sovereign identity. And that self-sovereign identity is you're in control of the identity. You can selectively present the types of information you want people to know about, and you can use that to accomplish lots of different goals on the internet. You can prove your age. You can prove that your passport says you're a male and that you live in the United States in a very particular jurisdiction, maybe a state, and that you have a particular first name. That allows you to say things about yourself that are fundamentally difficult for people to believe right now. If you go on most dating sites, they're littered with bots, and there are a lot of people who are pretending to be people that they fundamentally aren't. How do you know you're actually talking to somebody who has a passport that says that they're male or has a passport that says that they're female? These things are difficult to establish over the internet without having some kind of an intermediary do a bunch of KYC checks for you. Those KYC checks are very expensive and prone to causing cost issues with whoever implements those checks. So what you're starting to see on the internet is where these types of checks are required. You have businesses that are just exiting en masse from jurisdictions that require these types of checks. So I think that that's kind of that balance we're in right now. Is there are lots of places where you want to be able to do this kind of a thing, but sites are loath to do it because they are then exposed to PII that they don't want to have to store, and that if they are forced to store it, can cause significant costs if there's any kind of a breach. So it ups their level of having to be super cyber secure because now they have PII that's extremely valuable that they don't want to have to be responsible for. So this technology sort of lowers a lot of costs and makes a lot of things easier on the internet.
And PII, personal identifiable information.
Yeah, there's kind of two things in the world that everybody's up in arms about that they're trying to protect. Is the personally identifiable information. That's something that is data about individuals, and particularly in aggregate. So the European Union has a thing called GDPR that says if you're going to store that type of data, you have to do certain types of things, or you could be liable for fines and other types of penalties in the EU. So if you do business in the EU, you could certainly be in trouble. You could start incurring fines if you're not doing things correctly. The other one is called PHI, personal health information. That's a different type of data. It's not really related to what is within scope of NotBot, but it's another type of data about an individual that has a lot of rules around it, and making sure that you're protected as a consumer of medical services, and that those medical services that generate data aren't improperly being monetized or improperly being secured out in the world.
And so broadly, anyone who's in the identity space comes to realize that they have a somewhat of a conundrum of they need to be protecting this information and yet also making it available to law enforcement so that people's actions on the internet are discernible when ordered by a court. And
I think that that's one of the least important aspects of what's happening here. I would anticipate that the number of times that law enforcement needs to actually get involved is going to be, but it on the low side. Like, it's something that I think needs to be called out, and it has to be understood from the privacy protection guarantees that are given to you by Julia and by NotBot about what you can do and how this can protect your identity and protect your normalized behavior. But it shouldn't be used as a vehicle to say, well, I can somehow now under the veil of that privacy, do whatever I want. If you, and this is challenging for me as a libertarian because there are too many laws. I don't know that you could actually know that you're not breaking a law in some fashion by taking some innocuous action on the internet. So, this is a little bit problematic from that perspective. Like, I don't really know what to do with that libertarian sense that I have.
Well, you either have to move to an island, or at some point, if you're building things, you have to comply with these considerations. And it's interesting to me.
I just don't know how you do that functionally. I mean, think about it. How do you know when you walk out your front door you haven't broken 15 laws? There's so many laws. They're so complex. It's like it's just up to a jurisdiction to finally decide that they want to enforce something upon you. Selective enforcement of laws has been happening for a long time. Who knows how that might work in the future?
I mean, amen. You're preaching to the choir with regards to that. But what I find interesting is, and this is, I guess I'm running this by you because part of me wonders. I guess what I'm leading into is how does blockchain begin to change this relationship? Because it's my understanding that the way that identities are held heretofore with current technology puts all of that information collected into one great database. But here with this idea of multi-party compute and holding that identification and keys to identification both in your phone and broken up into a custodian, and then putting these hashes on a blockchain begin to give you the ability to separate uh, and and give greater isolation to the identity that's held by the custodian, because part of what
It's too much focus on the custodian. It's not the thing to focus in on this one. I think the only thing to note is that data does exist, and it exists with the custodian, and there's an important reason for that. One, it's that the multi-party compute dance has a partner to dance with. I think the only other way to do this would be to do the dance directly from the phone, and the phones, I just don't know about the routability of that, and also there's some other concerns that Ken could probably speak to in a better way. The custodian part, it's important to know that the data is out there and that data does exist, and so that this shouldn't be a license to act with impunity. But I still would say this is a problem for the world to solve. It's a problem for governments to solve. It's a problem for lawmakers that they have to finally decide like how this is going to work, because in the UK there are a lot of things you could do that to the US person would seem innocuous. I think memes can be illegal in the UK right now. So if you were to post some meme somewhere and you were to attach a proof of personhood not.bot to it, that could be problematic for you if you don't know what laws you're potentially running afoul of. And in the US, a lot of times what we say is more protected. We have freedom of speech, but some places that has also been challenged. So, people are getting in trouble for things they say in some places, and NotBot doesn't necessarily protect you from breaking the law. And the laws are so complex that now if you start to have an identity which is pierceable under the right circumstances, that you could run afoul of it. So you got to be careful how you're using it. And if you're doing it for things like that, to be okay. Let's say you want to go into YouTube and you want to browse over 18 content and you are over 18. Well, it's assumed that you're working with an entity that knows how to comply with the law. It's YouTube, and it's showing you content that is ostensibly okay. And viewing content probably is going to be okay. So there's huge swaths of use cases under which this is innocuous and way better than what we have now. But then there's other parts of it where if you're posting content, you still might be breaking the law right now and you don't know it. So this doesn't protect you from breaking the law, but what it does is it starts to make some activities on the internet pierceable under the right circumstances. And I just wouldn't focus on it because it's not the most important part of what we're talking about.
Okay, well, I guess there's also I don't know if I'm more of a libertarian or less. But there's certainly a conservative streak in me, but a decentralized streak that that does not see anonymity. If somebody writes graffiti on the side of my house, I want to know who did it.
Yeah, but this doesn't provide you any anonymity. It's privacy protecting. So
well, that's, I guess that's sort of what I was getting to, because I don't know. When I get into discussions with identity with person on the street and hardcore libertarians, as I want to do, um, I often run into these mistaken notions of anonymity that seem to me maybe Web 1.0 or prior. But what
I could imagine an issuer that might exist at some point that instead of working with a custodian and hanging on to the data and being pierceable, that they would chuck that data in the trash. Things like this could occur, under whatever circumstances. So this is the first cut at this. There may be parts of it as more computer security people and the security community starts to really take a look at this and think about it. It's certainly been thought about a lot by a variety of different entities. The Decentralized Identity Foundation is one that I could think of that's done a lot of work on this, that maybe a better place to go is start reading up on some of these things and thinking about it. I know that Ken has been doing a lot of that, and he's also been doing a lot of thinking about how to comply with various laws so that the product can actually start to exist rather than swing hard for some extremely libertarian ideal and not be able to get the product into the hands of people that want to do these more innocuous things. So it's not a license to do whatever you want, but it is a mechanism where sites can reduce risk, reduce costs, and users can start to trust and make trustable statements about themselves. And I think as long as you kind of limit it to those first things, you're going to be pretty okay, because if you make a truthful statement about yourself to another person or to a website, I can't imagine how you run afoul of some kind of law. It's what you do thereafter that you got to be careful about, but you got to be careful about that anyway.
Okay, so different custodians could be invoking this multi-party compute, and the use of...
Yeah, but that's future state. None of that exists
Right.
now. So it's just it's a could and a maybe. So I leave it to Ken to sort of, and the other people that are more knowledgeable about NotBot than me to chime in on that one.
Okay, well, let's talk about more of what NotBot is doing, because I want to get into maybe the aliases and more of this ability to reveal pieces of your identity. So because I see here on the screen we have alias name Hikata. What is this notion of aliases that NotBot brings to the table, along with these pieces of identity that are input through the passport?
So fundamentally, what you're doing when you create an identity using the Julia platform is you're creating a thing called a root DID. That's the root decentralized identifier. And you don't want to use that thing. You could potentially. I mean, technically, under the hood, you could just walk around with your root DID and it would functionally work the same way. Because of the aspects of how Chia work, it's like if you have a lineage, if a thing is of a certain type, then that thing that is of a certain type fits in the little holder. It's like if you have one of those boxes and it's got a little cutout shape and the plus only fits in the plus holes. Forget about that meme video where the kid just puts everything into the one hole. Let's say it really only fits in one hole, then everything that has that same shape can go through that hole. So your root DID is a DID. But what you can do with your root DID is you can forge other DIDs. You can make other ones that are bound to the other one in a particular way, but it's hard to parse that apart. But it's something you can check. So it's things you can verify. And what the root DID allows you to do is it allows you to do a creation of identities using a dance with other sites or even with yourself. And that's what an alias is. It's another way to talk about the same person, but to give them a name which can't be used to identify the individual. So you can think of it like a pen name, right? When an author sometimes wants to go write some other book and is like, well, I built up myself as this fantasy author, but I really want to write a detective novel. And I don't want people who read my fantasy novels to think that they're going to get a fantasy detective novel. This is legit just a detective novel, and I want to go dabble in that space. They would issue a pen name, and then they would go right under that name And then those books would succeed or fail on their own. And it wasn't necessarily known that the identity of both individuals was the same. At some point in the future, oftentimes that does get revealed. And so once you know that this alias is the same as the other person, you start to be able to know something deeper about that individual and their activities on the internet. So that's fundamentally what an alias is. It is another way to give it gives yourself another name, another way to talk about yourself on the internet that is not connected. But if somebody figures out they are connected and starts knowing that, then they can start to connect the dots. And so you have to be careful about how much data you reveal, what you say, and pictures are probably one of the ways that are going to de-identify people more than anything else. Because if you use the same profile picture for multiple aliases, it's going to be maybe clearer that that's the same you in multiple different spots. So you're kind of giving that away. But that's what an alias is fundamentally. And then a pairwise identity is where maybe NotBot is integrated with a site like X or Instagram, and you want to use your root identity to create an identity there. And they might have a policy that says, well, with one root identity, you can create 5 different things because we want you to be able to have multiple accounts and to bind to that. Maybe you have a business account. Maybe you have kind of 2 places on X that you're saying things about yourself or that you're saying about different types of topics, and so you want different accounts. So that's what aliases and pairwise identities are. So you're either making a privacy protecting identity with another site, or you're making another name for yourself that is rooted in your identity but is different from any other aliases or names that you have for yourself.
So I could say make an alias for my Amazon purchases, and if Amazon so chooses, then maybe they give me multiple accounts, but possibly that's going to be something that like a social media platform will be more interested in having more than one user.
Yeah.
And this begins to protect me from what currently occurs on the internet, which is the tracking and collecting of information. Because I'm thinking about the prices that are put up in front of users on Amazon.com.
Well, wait a minute. Let's go back to this alias thing for a second, because I think that this is critical that we talk about this in a bit more detail. Let's say that I've got my NotBot. I go through this first process and I create my identity, and then I create 2 aliases. Each of those aliases has the ability to attach credentials to it. So I could show you an alias and I could say, for this alias, it has a verifiable credential that is associated with it. It's its first name, and the name is Tuichi, right? I create another alias and I can present a credential with a first name, and the only credential that I can present is Toichi, because that's all I have. I don't have a different verifiable credential name. And so all these different aliases that I create, I can only use the verifiable credentials that I've got. So I can say I'm not a bot with each of those, and I can minimally say that. And that's really good in a lot of places, just to say I'm not a bot, I am a unique human. And I can walk around the internet and do that in a lot of places. I can also use my over 18 credential, which doesn't in any way really identify me. It just says, here's a human and it is over 18. Here is a human and it is over 18. And this is the kind of thing that you can start to go out on the internet and present. The thing about those aliases is there is a way that sites can know how many humans really back those aliases, so that if you try to create 2 aliases and present them duplicatively, that it can resolve and know that there's really only one human behind this. I don't know the details of that. That is for real down deep technical weeds of how this stuff can prevent against a Sybil attack, but apparently it can. It's another thing that you can essentially know if you're going to do some type of activity and you want to only do one for each human, that with NotBot you can be confident that you can dedupe people if they try to game this and present multiple different aliases, because aliases are names for the same person, but they are rooted in the same personness. And so that rooted in the same personness is something you can check.
Well, this layer of aliases, coupled with the selecting the pieces of your identity that you want to reveal, to me are a very, very powerful tool. So we're not just custodying identity and giving, um, or I should say we, NotBot. NotBot is not just custodying people's identities and giving them the ability to assert that, putting them under the control of doing so, but also begins to um, disassociate this identity collection racket that's going on whenever we are on the internet today. And this, to me, is the most interesting part, which I should just say gives me a lot of excitement as to what the future of our experience on the internet and what the economy of the internet might look for if or when this tool or some tool like it is broadly adopted.
Well, one of the things this does, and I don't know if you've seen videos of this, but CAPTCHA is broken. So right now, the way CAPTCHAs are working, when it uses Cloudflare or when it's using Google's CAPTCHA, mostly it's looking at your browser history, and you're agreeing to giving up a certain amount of your browsing history to prove that you're a human. And this is something that has been defeated. Like CAPTCHAs really aren't that safe anymore. They really don't check that you're human. It just checks that a sufficient amount of sophistication backs the thing which is trying to present that. NotBot is a way to do CAPTCHA way better because you can be given a challenge phrase by a site and then you have to sign it with your digital identity with your NotBot. And that's a very powerful way to ensure that you're, as a site, talking to an actual human and that you're only letting humans into a certain area. That's really important for things like Ticketmaster. It says, we are only selling 2 tickets to each person. Well, if we define a person as you have to be able to present us a NotBot, then that's pretty powerful. That's a statement that Ticketmaster can make, that we're not selling to bots. We're not selling to scammers and scalpers that are trying to take advantage of the system. It's also a way to limit one giveaway or limit one sale to one user, which is very difficult to do on the internet right now because those with sufficient sophistication and economic motivation will game those every time. And it's an extreme source of frustration for sites that want to try to be fair, for creators and artists that want to be fair with their fans. And this is a way to do it, which we've never really had before. It also helps you to do airdrops in a way that in the world of Web3, it was difficult to do if you wanted to get adoption from users and not just having some people with access to bots taking the lion's share of the rewards and disproportionately gaming your system.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about the Ticketmaster um, or airdrops in Web3, but we are rolling in on 40 minutes. I don't want to lead us down any other um, uh, side conversations. Was there anything else of note on the NotBot platform application that you wanted to discuss before we close it out?
Maybe I'll leave with this statement. It's decentralized trust for the internet. That's what this is leading to. If you've ever been DM'd by somebody and you're not sure that that person who's DMing you is being genuine, this is a way that you can challenge them. It's also a way that if you were operating something like a Discord server and you wanted to make sure that everybody that came in here was a human, you could gate the initial sign-up process to having to present a NotBot. And it's not possible to sell access to these things because when you start using your NotBot, there's a way that sites can know the oneness of individuals, that it's rooted to a single individual. And that makes the internet a much more powerful, much more segregatable space. And there are places on the internet where we as a society have decided collectively that that segregation is desirable, usually by age. It's age restricted content. And a lot of people have been saying, oh, we're trying to save the kids. We're trying to save the kids. And it leads to a surveillance state where everything you do is tracked and you have to show your ID everywhere you go. And then we just end up in this surveillance state. So this is an attempt to roll that back to, instead of being in a surveillance state we're in a place where we're in control of what data we want to present, and we can start presenting very little data about ourselves and still have this other unique characteristic that the world seems to want, which is to cordon off some areas for users, mostly by age, but also by other types of things which may be related to jurisdictions. And you could easily see the EU saying, we want only EU users in this area, so you got to have an EU nationality or an EU passport to be in this area. So we can start to cordon off parts of the internet, and we can do so in a way that protects everybody's privacy and allows us to not have a mass surveillance state. That's what the technology enables, and I'm really eager to see how far the team at Julia can take it. That's all I've got, and we'll see you next time on FOMO.